Alright, so here we are. You might be thinking to yourself, Jameis, what the hell? It's been almost a year since the last time you did one of these. And you are absolutely not wrong, but I do want to explain why. Our journey begins about 2 weeks after I finished the Hyzak video. I've already picked out which suit I'm doing next, I've already got a script set up, and I'm already collecting footage for it. Footage which you are now witnessing here. Everything's good, I'm starting to put together the episode, I've finally begun recording, and the Barzum gets a massive update. My Barzum video is still in the process of being made, and it's already completely out of date. So cool, fine, whatever. I get right back into it, start collecting more data, give more testing, everything's about ready to go, it's about early April now, and the Barzum gets a new level. This nonsense is happening while I am working full-time in a 60-hour work week, by the way. And I can just end the explanation right here. No, seriously. So cut to the end of the work season, we're finally done, I finally have the script all written up, everything is essentially done, it's just a matter of putting the finishing touches on it. And then my computer dies. So at this point I'm like, you know what? The Barzum is cursed and so is this video. Enough with this. And so I just shelved it. I shelved it entirely. So cut to about a month ago, and Namco reveals that they are planning to do a Steam launch of GBO2. The network test is a complete disaster, but a lot of people are psyched about it. So my friends start approaching me and they're like, Jamie, because there's this new version of the game being proposed, maybe you should start doing Gundam Battle Academy again. So at this point I'm like, alright, I'm not one to turn down a request. While I was trying to figure out which one I was going to do, however, my friend Lemon then approached me and was like, hey Jamie, you should do my favorite suit. And I'm like, you know what? Fine. The Gouf it is. From a historical perspective, the Gouf was intended to basically help keep up the momentum after Zeon's invasion of Earth. From this point onward, it was going to be a ground pounders war, so it was generally considered that Zeon was going to need a lot more suits specialized for surface combat, as opposed to more variable suits that could handle both surface and space combat like the Zaku 2. Unfortunately, the Gouf didn't really live up to its hype all that well. It had a relatively modest production run, at least by the standards of Zeon suits. It wound up quickly superseded by the Dom. The Gouf was a favorite amongst Zeon veterans, however, especially ones involved in the Gobi Desert campaign. Most surviving Goufs got upgraded to different versions of the Gouf as time went on. Interestingly, every single one of these variants is currently available in Gundam Battle Operation, and yes, we will be covering all of them in turn. But today we're focusing on the main one, the original, the Ramba Rao Special. The Gouf is a 250 to 400 point ground-only raid. It is also ground specialized and is generally considered the first of the game's challenge suits. Challenge suits are suits that have incredibly high power, but also a very, very high skill ceiling. Most of them are incredibly hard to play and very hard to use, but the payoff, if you do it correctly, is insane. The most infamous and well-known such challenge suit is undeniably the Gyan. Gyan mains are an in-game urban legend in GBO2. Every player who has ever run into one has the exact same story. They enter a match, there's a Gyan player on the enemy team, and because the Gyan's pretty bad, they don't give it any mind. 2 minutes later, that Gyan has killed every single member of the player's team, including the Gundam Mark II that they were using. In general, the Gouf will be the first suit the player encounters that will generally contribute to this kind of phenomenon. And when you first start using it, it won't really be too apparent why. It's extremely fast and marginally tough, but its defenses are kind of mediocre, especially its beam defense. It does have maneuver armor, but it does not have emergency evasion. It has a shield that's quite durable, but is also very small. It has an above-average number of custom parts, but they're also completely front-loaded. All of these are their own challenge in their own way, but if anything, it's the loadout of the Gouf that creates the biggest problem. It's a close combat raid, but it lacks a conventional instant stagger option. Instead, it relies on a machine gun. At a glance, this machine gun looks like complete trash. It's got a poor range, only 250, and a lot like the GM rifle, it has a pretty wide scatter. However, it fires very quickly and does a surprisingly heavy amount of damage. It's also an unusually strong scaler, so at higher tiers, it will do disproportionately higher damage. It also reloads really quick. For better or for worse, the Gouf gets no other primaries, so if you're going to be using the Gouf, you're going to have to make this machine gun work. Thankfully, it's not the only thing this suit has. It also has a ridiculously powerful melee weapon. The Gouf's heat sword is a real prize at 250. It's nearly 33% stronger than either your basic Beam Saber or Heat Hawk, and nearly 25% stronger than the enhanced version. And all of that comes on a suit with front-loaded melee boost, a ton of close-range parts for the tier it comes out in, and melee combo controller too. Needless to say, if the Gouf manages to hit you once in close combat, it's going to do a lot of damage. The damage on your full combo string, however, is absolutely ridiculous. However, as impressive as the overall damage from this is, It has nothing, and I underline this, nothing, before the third and absolutely unique piece of equipment the Gouf has. And that would be the heat rod. Now, many suits get something like a heat rod. For example, the Aqua GM gets the hand anchor. The Gouf Custom, meanwhile, gets the more modern cable-style heat rod. The Marasai gets the Sea Serpent. The Gyaradoga gets the shock anchor. The common thread with all of these is that they're a direct forward poke and it does a heavy stagger on impact. Most of them also carry debuffs if you manage to hit, too. In comparison, the Gouf's heat rod is more the tentacle type, and while it does have the jab, it doesn't heavy stagger. However, unlike all of those, it's the segmented tentacle style heat rod. So instead, it has directional melee. That means, yes, you can side swing it and hit an entire crowd of people. Or, alternately, you can downswing it for a ranged knockdown, something no other suit can do. The sheer utility brought about by the Gouf's heat rod is so ridiculous, I can practically devote an entire video to it. Bummed out because you can't red Zuko with the Gouf? Use the heat rod's side swing. If you have enough boost to cancel out the recovery animation, you can then immediately launch into a melee combo with the Heat Sword. Allies knock down an enemy nearby, but you can't get in a position to use your Heat Sword? No problem. Whip out your Heat Rod and smack him down from 30 feet away. Some jackass support being a cover camper? Downswing him from over cover and laugh as he can't do anything about it. Even better, unlike the Agugai, your Heat Rods can't be countered. This also makes it a remarkably safe option to use if you're careful about it. The main downside is that it has a rather long recovery animation, regardless of how you use it. With careful timing and use of boosters, you can eliminate some of the recovery time, but never all of it. The forward jab has the least recovery time, the side swing has very little, and the backswing has a lot. With its sheer mobility and immense punch, the Gouf has a lot of potential in the hands of someone who knows how to use it. The problem is that if you don't know how to use it, it is unequivocally one of the worst raids you can use. A big part of this comes from what it's going up against and the tier that it shows up in, namely 250. There's a lot of more conventional raids that show up at around this point, namely the GM Ground-type MSV, the GM Light Armor, and the Zaku 1, just to name a few. The main other 250-point raid is the Zuda, which is mostly a counter-sniper suit. However, the biggest thing that caused it to fall off in terms of popularity was none other than the Agugai. Coming out in the same cost bracket, and being slightly more durable, the Agugai has stealth and is an amphibious suit besides. However, the Agugai is, if anything, an even harsher suit strategy-wise, and it really can't kick out the same kind of punishment that the Gouf can. Getting good with the Gouf is going to require that you use a slightly different approach. You're going to have to master all three of its weapons and how they're used. The Gouf excels at fights in close combat areas. You're going to find it works really well on maps like Deserted City, Ruined City, and Mountain, just to name a few. The Gouf's biggest problem is that it is by far one of the easiest suits to padlock. All of its weapons have very short range, with its main weapon only having 250. Corollary to this is that its preferred combat range happens to be one that is notably unfriendly to it, namely because it's where all the blue Zuka trash hangs out. While its main role on the battlefield will ever be a support hunter, it also works very well as both a vanguard suit and, of course, as an escort suit. Its speed makes it particularly good at pushing up the battle line and capturing points. It can work particularly effectively if you have it hunting with allies. They can tank some of the abuse that would otherwise be directed at you, and their offense can plug some of the holes you have in your offense as well. So where exactly do we place the Gouf in terms of tier? Well, we're going hard with the new grid, so I'm just going to pop it all out for you at once. At 250, excellent tier. Nothing can even come close to this thing in terms of damage output, and it is absolutely one of the best urban combat suits in the game at that cost. At 300, good tier. Capable of keeping up with a lot of the suits of the meta at that range. Struggles a bit more as the likes of the Ifrit and Ifrit DS hit the table, but otherwise manages to keep pace. 350, it gets busted down to OK tier. Suits that can reliably padlock it and also are way better within their effective ranges are starting to become the norm. 400, bump down to poor tier. Gundam and early production Gelgoog mean that beam weapons are now the norm rather than the exception. Do not take this for meaning that it cannot work here. The problem is that the Gouf is taking more and more skill to get the same kind of performance out of as suits that are just coming out. 450 and above, awful tier. Camphor, Alex, nuff said. With all this out of the way, the Gouf is an extremely powerful suit, and, if used in capable hands, it can actually be one of the most effective suits around. The problem is that, with every tier it goes up, it has to deal with harder and harder opposition. By the time you start seeing the Gelgoog line, this suit is getting harder and harder to justify. But at the lower tiers, where there aren't as many options available, hold on and shut up, because this thing is amazing when it works right.